Hello and welcome to the CBB edition of the Supershow, brought to you by FTN Network. I am your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, and I want to start off by saying thank you to each and every one of you who continues to support the show, the content, everything that we're doing here, the movement at FTN. You guys can further support us by jamming that like button, sharing the video, and commenting throughout, whether that's on demand or during the live broadcast. I am very, very grateful for that. We have some college basketball to talk about as we wind down through the college football season. Had some wackiness today as usual. We do have a solid 9-game main slate that we're going to grind through. As we get closer to football wrapping up, I know there's been some complaints about the contest. They will start to get larger. We will start to see more of that football money coming in. And as we get into March, that is when the real fun actually begins. But right now, we're in the beginning stages of conference play. We're going to start seeing guys exposed as non-con heroes. We're going to start seeing which teams and players are for real, which coaches can coach. You know, all that good stuff. DVP is developing. We're having all kinds of success with the various matchups that we've, been figuring out. As promised, I've been talking about having a projections, whether that's ownership or minutes or my own variation of fantasy stuff. And I have the last 2 days been sharing snapshots of something that we've been working on to share with you guys. So this will be the first real slate we get to do it on a bigger than 4 or 5 game set. The beginning of this week and into after the holiday, we've been having some real success. That 2-game slate that we started with Morgan State, there were like 3 or 4 guys who didn't play for them that were like 15 to 25% owned. We saw it yesterday as well with guys, not making the reaction to Jameer Young being ruled out. And then even the 2-game slate earlier today, in the Discord, very active there on FTN. We saw several guys and key players out that ended up with 30% ownership there from the Valpo team. Just a lot of good stuff happening there in the FTN Discord. Even when I can't be there to post information, somebody is backing me up doing so. I truly believe it is one of the more active and best Discord communities when it comes to college basketball. If you're not part of the FTN network already, ftndaily.com, ftnbets.com. There is a lot of different packages, content that we offer. You want to certainly check that out, even if you do a month trial or something, just to see what it's all about. We do the written content, we have shows, we have all that stuff, but it's our Discord that we really stand on, our projections that we really stand on, our NFL team for ownership are just like Rain Man good with it. A lot of fun stuff happening and a lot of money being made with it. That's at the window or with those fabulous green screens that we get from DraftKings and FanDuel. So a lot of fun, a lot of money being made here, and we're going to have more and more chances to build on that bankroll as we work through the college basketball season. It seems like it's going to go fast. We have something like 80 something days before we get into March. It will go fast, but there's still so many opportunities to hit these slates, and conference play is really where we can show out and start to pull our weight a little bit and kind of expand our edge as well. So very proud of the work we've done, and I'm proud of this projection sheet that we've had working. Still fine tuning, but the next show, which will be Monday night, we will be doing some screen sharing so that you guys can see what goes into that as well. All right, let's get into the slate. If you're new to Supershow, what we do is break down each game from a DFS prop betting and prize picks perspective. We do it game by game, the tried and true method of breaking down a slate. We'll list any core plays or matchup based things that I like, any potential fades, or if the game just is really not that fantasy viable pricing wise, maybe matchup, tempo, any of that stuff. We'll talk about that as well. Starting off the slate here is a doozy of a game. We have Hofstra, who has been a very fun team for DFS purposes for years, even without Aaron Estrada, and St. John's. That is going to be a truly, truly fun game. There's going to be a lot of points scored in this one. The total's only 148.5. I think the over is very much in play. I would be shocked if it didn't hit like 155, 160. Honestly, that seemed a little bit low to me. St. John's being 9-point favorites. As much as I love the Johnnies, one of their biggest fans on the West Coast, I do think Hofstra at +9 is live in this one. They have the chops to really kind of hang with them, honestly. The numbers here for Hofstra, let's pull that up on the old Ken Palm page. They are 143rd in defensive efficiency. Tempo-wise, just 273rd, so they're not playing at the fastest pace in the world. Did play Duke pretty well for the first half before fading out, eventually losing by 20 to them. They also just had their doors blown off against UNLV and a tough, close loss against St. Louis, but strong wins against Wright State, South Florida, and High Point for them. This is a team that's definitely going to compete. Ken Palm has it 79-69 in favor of St. John's. Again, I do think that they have a chance to make that closer, like a 5-6 point type of thing, and I do think they're going to cover. The starting lineup for this Hofstra Pride team typically is the following: Tyler Thomas, Darlinson Dubar, who is just fantastic in all facets of the game for DFS purposes, Jaquan Carlos, Bryce Washington, and Jocko Fritz. Typically want to look at the starting lineup for this group. Now, they do have the Iona transfer, Silas Sunday, who is playing some additional minutes off the bench recently, but still not getting enough to really use anyone outside of this starting five. Reason being, they play a lot of minutes. Tyler Thomas playing 96% of the available minutes. That's the fourth most in the entire country. 33.7% shot rate, 28.6% usage rate. He is shooting 37% from long range, and he is the 19th most efficient free throw shooter in the country, making 94% of his 34 attempts. Way to go, Tyler. Way to go. Jaquan Carlos playing 85.6% of the available minutes, and our guy Darlinson Dubar playing 84.3% of the minutes. Now, Jocko Fritz and Bryce Washington play in the mid-60s in terms of percentage. So they'll be the two that are mainly getting subbed out. There'll be Sunday coming in for a little bit. There'll be some Kajan Robinson coming in for a little bit. So really, we can kind of start to focus down even further our player pool on this team. And Jocko Fritz, we'll have to take turns probably guarding Soriano. It's just a bad situation for him. He's likely going to get in foul trouble. And then you look at Bryce Washington, who's there at 4-3. An intriguing price for him, definitely, especially if we get him in the 25 to 30-minute range. He is a viable value play at that range. Looking at it, Tyler Thomas, $9K. You're having to pay a top tier price for him. Now, he is a guy capable of hitting 40 plus. I do think he's more of a lower end pay up on this slate, even though we know he's going to play every minute. He's going to probably take 20 shots. Like, everything about that sounds great, I know. But he definitely lacks some of the higher end games, top heavy ceiling games that you want to have at this 9K price point. I do think he coasts in 30, but how much more over that, it remains to be determined. And there's an opportunity cost there that's just a little bit too high for me. Looking at Jaquan Carlos, he's been heating up recently, 7-3, still a little bit too high even for him. So that leaves us with Darlinson Dubar at 7-2. Great steal rate, contributes on the glass heavily. He can score at a high level, taking more shots, taking a ton of threes, like just absolutely chucking, making 40% of his 72 attempts. Now, Tyler Thomas has 111 attempts. He's ultra chucking, but he's shooting 36%. Dubar just a little bit more consistent there, has a block rate over 3% as well, a very strong shot rate at 26%. Just the kind of total package in terms of he's going to contribute in all categories, not going to be reliant on one stat over the other, and he just makes him a very safe look. And you look at the game against Duke, 24 points, 8 rebounds. He had 41 fantasy points at Duke. St. Louis, a tougher historically defense, and Coach Ford, 31 minutes, 13 points, 11 rebounds, 36 fantasy points. The recent blowout against UNLV, not as good. He did shoot 7 of 10, had 17 points, but he didn't have those peripherals that he normally has. However, that was more of an outlier game. I believe he will get back to racking up those steals, those blocks, those rebounds, everything else that we're used to and accustomed to him having. You go back to the South Florida game, 37 minutes, 11 rebounds, 24 points, nearly 50 fantasy points. We had him that day at 5'9". A lot of people did. He absolutely cracked the entire slate. He's just a very strong option at 7-2. So Dubar is our guy. St. John's side, we have some injury news to talk about here, or I guess, some ailments. Chris Ledlam for St. John's does have a sprained ankle and is considered highly doubtful. Now DraftKings has him as out, but so I would expect him to be out, but there is, I guess, a potential chance of him to come back here. Now Ledlam is a fine play. Ordinarily, I do think he's starting to adjust to his role and understanding that this is a team that belongs to Joel Soriano. The fact of early in the season, Ledlam was taking just a bajillion shots, and it was really hurting their overall efficiency. And it was really honestly hurting Joel Soriano, which he is the star of the team. I know Dennis Jenkins is there, but this is Soriano's team. He needs to get those looks. He needs to get those touches, feed the big man, make the entry pass. And he started to take a step back. Now, this is the normal starting lineup for St. John's: Dennis Jenkins, Chris Ledlam, Joel Soriano, Glenn Taylor, and Naheem Ali. Now, without Ledlam, that leaves us with probably RJ Lewis, who just got back recently, played 18 minutes in their last game against UConn, or possibly going with a smaller lineup of Jordan Dingle, although I think they'd probably be wise to continue to bring Dingle off the bench until he figures out his woes. He's getting better. He's improving, but he certainly doesn't look like the Ivy League version of himself just yet. The other option would be Zuby Ejiofor, who did play just the 10 minutes there last game. He's, of course, the highly rated recruit that transferred over from Kansas. Perhaps he could sneak into a starting spot there if they wanted to go with the bigger lineup. Not really necessary going up against this Hofstra team. So I do think that we see RJ Lewis jam into the starting lineup there without Ledlam. He's only 5'1", which is definitely an interesting price. Played his first game, all the way back in late November, 16 minutes, had to miss a bunch of time dealing with some shin issues and other ailments. 18 minutes in that UConn game. He was fairly solid, 6 points, 3 rebounds, 2 steals, 2 for 5. But I think we see him play over 20 minutes here, and especially as a starter, he has to be considered in this matchup. Lewis just adds a different dynamic to this team and is a missing piece that they really are going to need. He can score. He can do a lot of different things and contribute in ways that other guys on the St. John's bench just simply can't, at least right now. Glenn Taylor, 4-4, still relatively cheap. Had a nice game against Xavier. Typically, he's going to be hovering around that 10-12 mark. We can get more like we did against Xavier. It's certainly a matchup that he can do some things. Taking Ledlam off the table, that should give him some additional shots as well. So 4-4 Glenn Taylor absolutely has to be in consideration as well. Dennis Jenkins is a nice price at 6'6". I suspect we'll see Jenkins be heavy chalk on this slate. Why do I think that? Because ordinarily, anytime Jenkins is on the slate and he's under this 7.5 or 7K range, people just jam him in. We're seeing a lot of chalk for players in this range. And with how tight pricing has been this year and the lack of overall ownership projections of certain sites, that has obviously hurt other publications. Let's not, pussyfoot around here or sugarcoat it. There's people who have been affected by lack of ownership projections being posted by people. We're not affected, but there are people that are having trouble with that. So what we're seeing is a gear or a shift towards players in the certain price range. We saw it with Brandon Carlson tonight, the 6 to 7K range. Solid enough logs, name value, a known commodity, and somebody who's getting minutes. And Dennis Jenkins fits all of those categories, and he has very solid rates as well. So at 6'6", and we can use him. We can consider him highly towards the top of our priority plays as well. 25.2% shot rate, 25.3% usage rate, 35.4% assist rate. He's only shooting 26% from long range, but he does a lot of good things for this team. He was in massive foul trouble in that Xavier game. That was the game in which he was super chalky at 6'7". Just followed that up against UConn with a 23. Really nice bounce back opportunity for Dennis Jenkins. And then we get to our man, Joel Soriano, who is 9'4", a solid price considering he was just over 10K against UConn. They did a fairly decent job on him. He still had a double-double, 14 and 11, but 34 at 10-1 leaves a little bit of, something to be desired there. We know the deal on Soriano. He can pop a 50. He can, absolutely melt the slate down. A lot of the issues with his lack of touches have been solved, not fully, but they have really been rectified. And Coach Pitino's got the guys buying in that, hey, we got to get him touches on damn near every single time down the floor. He's got a top 15 offensive rating, top 15 true shooting percentage. He is a top 25 offensive rebounding percentage, top 75 defensive rebounding rate. In fact, his combined rebounding rate is well over 35%. 8.2% block rate as well. Now, he's only taken 9 threes, but he's made 7 of them. So Soriano's making it a little bit difficult because if you leave him wide open out there, he will hit it. He will shoot it, and he's not afraid to do so. Won't force them up, and he doesn't do it very often, but that is another element to his game that he has started to develop. Love Joel Soriano. Probably more of a luxury play. I'm really into the semi-balance as much as possible. That's my thing. I really believe in it. It works well for me. So Soriano's probably not going to be a guy I start with, but I certainly have quite a bit of exposure planned for this first game, and a mini game stack is in order, and something that if it works out, people will be chasing us for the rest of the day. So heavy exposure on this game. And then Naheem Aline at 4-1, playing over 20 minutes, even more on the table without Ledlam. Very scoring reliant. We saw Xavier put up a big number, 24, UConn 6. That is a very volatile situation there with Aline, but he's probably taken 10 plus shots without Chris Ledlam. So another bit of value that we have there. All right, we have Virginia versus Notre Dame. Now, Virginia was just on the slate here, playing that Morgan State team. Let me get this pulled up. Now, we had to test the DVP, right, because we had Malcolm Dandridge where nobody else did. He panned out well, and we've been able to take bigs against Virginia, bigs, if you will, against Virginia for the last 2 or 3 seasons. They just play a style, and they don't have the height, at least lately, and especially not this year, to deal with active and aggressive big men who can, get it done on the glass. Block shots. They're creating havoc. That is a thing that Virginia really struggles with. Now, playing against Morgan State, they did not have that person. So while we've been able to punish Virginia all season, there really wasn't anybody on Morgan State capable of taking advantage of that. I did stubbornly play Alan Udamato, who played 25 minutes. He had 0 points, 6 rebounds, and 6 turnovers. Absolutely awful. Clearly overwhelmed by the moment. Christian Oliver, who came off the bench, he had 5 points, 4 rebounds, 2 blocks, and a steal. I suppose kind of towards the DVP there, but obviously when we're targeting these spots that we think we can do well with, the team has to have a capable person in that archetype that can take advantage of that DVP. Now we're looking at Virginia playing Notre Dame. The spread here is 9 points in favor of Virginia, and the total is 116.5, which is obviously very minuscule. That's very ordinary and usual for a Virginia game. Looking at Notre Dame, we'll start with them. What do they have in terms of their front court options that we could look at against this Virginia team? Well, this is a team that we are going to have a difficult time, I suspect, being able to find one to take full advantage. The starting lineup for this team typically is Marcus Burton, Tay Davis, who I still really like and think has a bright future, just needs some more development, J.R. Konisny, Carey Booth, and Keba Njai. Off the bench, they bring Matt Zona and Braden Shrewsbury, still a very, very short rotation for this Notre Dame team. We like that. Now, the best thing in terms of positional, archetype, who can take advantage of this is probably Tay Davis. Keba Njai is there as a near 7-foot guy. He can shoot a little bit. He can, rebound a little bit, but he's not necessarily that super aggro athletic type that is going to fully give Virginia problems. He's also got a high foul rate, and that's something that I just don't see working out for him. He is only 4'3". There is merit to having him in your GPP player pool, but using him in a main build just doesn't seem to be in the cards. I would rather go to Tay Davis, and I know his price isn't that appealing at 5'4". He did play 33 minutes in his last game, 2 games before that, 34, so he's getting plenty of playing time. He's also a bit of a fouler, less than Keba is. Strong rebounding rates. Like I said, still relatively raw, has some more developing to do, but comes over from Seton Hall and is a guy that has the skill level and skill set, I should say, to take advantage. He has a combined rebounding rate of nearly 27%. It's a lean play, to be sure. There's going to be lots of opportunities for us to target bigs and challenge this DVP against Virginia. So we don't have to force it here, but it's going to be something that's on my mind, and I'm going to tweak the sheet a little bit and see where we end up with Tay Davis, especially if we give him 30 minutes. Marcus Burton's been the high usage stud. Not really the greatest spot to target him against Virginia, so we don't necessarily have to do that. 7K is a fair price for him. He hasn't been very highly owned on any slate this year, so he's always a kind of a nice GPP get whenever you're making multiple lineups. And J.R. Cole coming off a 40 fantasy point game against the Citadel 2 games ago, playing over 30 minutes as well. He does also have pretty strong offensive rebounding rates, almost 9%, but he's pretty lean play there at 5'9" too, and he takes up a valuable guard slot. On the Virginia side, they should be able to do some things here against this Notre Dame team. If Notre Dame were to get hot and start banging threes and making things difficult for Virginia on the offensive side, there is a situation or a pathway for Notre Dame to win this game, or just make it to where Virginia, fizzles out and they can't keep up the score. And I don't think that Notre Dame's going to come in here and drop like 90 or anything, but the situation. Anytime a team can get hot from 3 and extend a quick 9-10 lead on Virginia, it's very difficult for them to catch up. I think defensively they will make life miserable for this Notre Dame team. The Virginia squad here, we'll start with Andrew Rohde, who's there at 5'7". One of the best games he's had in a Virginia uniform against Morgan State. Just was all over the place. 10 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, 3 steals. Now, he was a fantastic player last year as a freshman at St. Thomas, put up strong numbers. I always thought he could come in here and contribute right away. It's taken some time here, but now that we're going to be getting into conference play, we really get to see what he offers. He had a nice game back in early December against Syracuse when he had 22 fantasy points. He's probably a little bit too high at 5'7", but he is a player I want to continue to monitor because anytime he dips below 5K, I think he's just a really strong play. He's going to be getting minutes. It's proven. Coach Bennett's using him defensively. He's doing enough to get those minutes, and 30-plus minutes at sub 5K just makes sense for pretty much anyone who has the kind of volume or at least the statistical contributions that Andrew Rohde has. We saw a major chalk, Isaac McNeely. He ended up being fine, but 19 fantasy points at 5'9". Here he comes, reloaded again. We know he's out there to shoot threes. That's his main contribution. He is going to contribute in rebounds and other categories, but he's mostly just going to make value if those shots are falling. Looking at the Notre Dame defense, they're 112th in defensive efficiency. Their 3-point defense, not particularly great. This is a spot where I could see McNeely doing well, but he's going to have the volume, which he always does. It's just a matter of if those shots are going to be falling. I don't personally think he's cheap enough at 5'9" to prioritize by any means. If you land there for the last spot in your lineup, that's okay, but he's not somebody that I'm really all that keen on right now. Reese Beekman's priced up at 8'4". It's a little bit too high for me. We had no choice against Morgan State because there were 2 games, and he did quite well at 36. But for the most part, I think we're looking for higher upside guys in the 8K range if we do go there. No offense to Beekman. We used him all the time last year, but there's a big difference using him at 6K and 8'4". Love Ryan Dunn. I know I might be alone in that love. He just does so many things that are great for DFS and contributes in multiple categories. And lately, he's been rebounding at an extremely high clip. 21 rebounds in his last 2 games, which includes 11 against a tough Memphis team, and then 10 in that game on Tuesday against, or was it Wednesday against Morgan State. 6'9's a fine price for him. He's like kind of a GPP look here. I think he is going to be a major matchup problem for Notre Dame. Now, the problem with Dunn is similar to the problem with Beekman, and it's not been a problem the last 2 games, but it has been for majority of the season, is that he doesn't always take the shots that are available to him. He passes on open looks or makes that extra pass, which is fine, but sometimes you want to see him take more shots. Took 14 against Memphis, loved it. Took 9 against Morgan State. Loved it. He's not a three-point shooter. A lot of what Dunn does is he turns a steal into, even though Virginia is known as being slower, and turns it into a fast break opportunity. And he has a lot of points off of steals and turnovers, and that's a great way for him to chain together a nice little, DFS output for you. So I do like Dunn. I think he has major upside in this matchup, but 6'9" is obviously not a price that we need to concern ourselves with too much in our main builds. There is some semi-values that we can have here. Leon Bond looked very good against Morgan State. Minutes are still going to be capped somewhat between 18 to 20, and now that he's priced up at 5'4", not 4'2", that makes a very difficult decision. And he's got guard forward eligibility, and I don't mind him as maybe like a GBP alt type play. I do think he can have success here. It would require some foul trouble to guys like Groves, maybe Buchanan, maybe one of the other McNeelys of the world, but there is a real good shot for Bond to make value here in this matchup if we can just get him those additional minutes. But I think Bond's going to be really good for this team for a long time. And you have Jake Groves at 5K. Just the 15 minutes against Morgan State, he was very, very high owned. It was a 2-game slate, so his price sitting there at 5K. He's fine if you want him, but a pretty low end option overall. And then Elijah Gertrude at 4K, just a name that you need to be aware of. He's probably a year away from being a regular contributor, but he is somebody that they're very, very high on. And we have seen 18 plus minutes in back-to-back games from Tane Murray, who sits there at 3.5. So that is relevant, but probably not so much in this game. Moving on to Pittsburgh versus Syracuse. This is one that we are definitely going to be interested in. Hey, what's up? Little Caesars in the house. What it do? So this is a 1.5 point spread in favor of Syracuse. I do like Pittsburgh, even though, we'll be watching the Mike Randall's betting show in the morning, and I'm almost certain he'll be telling us that Pittsburgh is awful and doesn't want to bet them. And he's usually right. But I do like them plus 1.5. Total of 148. Now, usually we're looking for the high post against Syracuse. Most people looking for those 3-point shooters against the zone. Now, Syracuse is different now. They're not running exclusively zone. They're still playing it, but it's not the end-all, be-all like it was under Coach Boeheim. Under Coach Autry, they switch it up a little bit, but they're still definitely doing so, and we can look for players that we think are going to be in that quarterback high post type of role. Now, usually when Pittsburgh is on the slate, I've tried to target Blake Hinson. Blake Hinson has been very good to us over the years, but he does come with extreme downside, and he can be an outright tilting type of DFS play. The price is right at 7.3. I think it's a range that on a big slate like this, people might gloss over. It's a forward position, which we historically have a hard time filling. Forwards are usually a weaker spot in college basketball. But he's a guy who does the things that punish a defense like Syracuse. And he shoots threes as well. So you've got everything going for you there. In his career, let's pull this up here. Right now, he's leading the team in usage at 25% and shot rate at almost 30%. Now, he's making 46% of his threes on 98 attempts. That's top 75 in the country. He is just absolutely obliterating his career average highs. He's 38% three-point shooter last year, 31 the year before that. And during his time at Ole Miss, he was right around 33, 34%. So he has worked on that area of his game, and he has been a very lethal three-point shooter. Now we go back and look at some of the Syracuse games here that he had last year. In a 99-82 victory, played 36 minutes, 28% usage rate, 22 points. He took 17 threes in that game. That's why I wanted to bring that up, because the volume was heavy there. They have a similar team, and he's still a focal point. He might just take 10-plus triples. He had 6 rebounds, 2 assists, and a steal. It wasn't the peripherals stat line that I was hoping for that day, but he definitely had that opportunity with nearly 20 threes. Took 20 shots total. Only 3 of them were inside the arc. Did get to the foul line a numerous amount of times, but overall, it was a pretty solid outing for him. Especially considering he's not like a 9K option. Go back to early December of last year, 39 minutes. This was a home game against Syracuse in which they won 84-82. He took another 9 threes, but he had 25 points, 13 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 blocks, and a steal. Exactly what the doctor ordered when we're looking for somebody who is going to play more of a high post role and also be able to step out and hit threes. Blake Hinson is the type of archetype that is going to give Syracuse a major problem, even if they're not running exclusive zone. He's just going to be an absolute stud. And the nice thing is he's been fairly mediocre the last couple of games, and they've been blowout games against lesser competition. That might trick some people there and get him passed over. You go back to the game against West Virginia, 35 minutes, took 19 shots, over 40 fantasy points at nearly 8K, 40 against Clemson in a close loss, 32 against Missouri. Closer games, he is going to come through. He's going to play a lot of minutes. Fouls, not really, knock on wood, an issue with Blake Hinson. He is one of my favorite players on this slate. We have really done well targeting low-owned, projected high-post players against the Syracuse zone because, for the most part, people just take three-point shooters against them. Looking at the rest of the Pittsburgh roster here, they do have some guys. Carlton Carrington, the freshman, who's been really good. Ishmael Leggett, who has been phenomenal coming in and stepping into a alpha guard role. Zach Austin, Federico, and then, of course, Guillermo Diaz-Graham, who comes in and has the random pop-off games, and then he'll end up getting very low minutes. Now, he did start against Purdue-Fort Wayne. He played 30 minutes in that one, had 13 and 8, 3 blocks, 2 steals. If we can continue to get Guillermo Diaz-Graham big minutes, he has started the last 2. Coming into the season, I really honestly thought he was going to be a starter and playing 30 minutes anyways. The reason for him to start the last 2 is that they moved Federico to the bench, where he only played 17 and 9 minutes over the last 2 games after being a starter for the first month and a half of the season. This is a spot where Federico can be fully ignored, especially if he's not starting. Now, Diaz-Graham at 5'8" becomes pretty interesting. He also takes threes, not to the level that Blake Hinson does, but he can. He can contribute in all categories. He rebounds fairly well. And he's overall just like we saw him late March last year, how good he can be. So please continue to give him these minutes. Looking at his rates, 19.4% usage, but his combined rebounding rate is almost 27%. We'll take it. He has a block rate over 6%. We'll take it. And he's shooting 37% from long range. Also definitely taking that. And he's shooting 71%, which is top 40 in the country on 2-point field goals. Gets himself in a position for bunnies. He's just very active. You look at him, you see him like, oh, wow, this guy's tall. Doesn't have a lot of weight. He's kind of lanky. What's this guy going to do? He can absolutely ball. And now that we're seeing him in a starting role playing more minutes, he's firmly in our player pool. The last 2 games were against lesser tier opponents, but I'm not worried about that. If he's a starter, he's in play for me. Ish Leggett at 7.5, more of a GPP look. I'm prioritizing Blake Hinson over him. And then Carrington at 7.6. The freshman's been really good, but he's also had some bottom of the barrel performances to be expected from a younger player like him. Early in the season against NCAA&T, we saw a 55. Then a 20. So there's some ups and downs there. He's certainly worth a gander in GPPs. Takes a lot of threes. In the last 2 games alone, he's taken 12, only made 1, but that's not going to stop him from taking them. So I do not hate the idea of using Carrington if you want, but clearly for me, I'm going the Hinson route and also Guillermo Diaz. Zach Austin, who has shown some pop, has some foul issues. Minutes are sporadic. I don't think we can use him at 6'3". That price is going to have to come down. So to tailor our Pittsburgh exposure, Hinson, Guillermo Diaz-Graham, a little GPP sprinkle of Carrington and Leggett. On the Syracuse side, very different from Autry to Boeheim, but yet very similar, if that makes any sense. They run a rotation that's still pretty shallow, about 7-8 deep at most. In the last game against Niagara, they were controlling from start to finish. They ended up winning by 12, but I thought it was interesting that Naheem McLeod ended up playing 13 minutes, but Malik Brown, who's been playing really well since last year, comes off the bench, has 15 and 10, dominant throughout. Quadir Copeland comes off the bench, 8 assists, 12 points, 3 rebounds. He's actually been really solid. And then we saw accelerated minutes for Kyle Cuffey, another of those Kansas Island misfit toys, and Benny Williams, who, frankly, I'm shocked has not hit the portal yet. I keep waiting for it. It hasn't happened yet. He's not getting minutes, but good on him for staying, I guess. So you have 2 bench pieces for Syracuse priced up in the 6K range. Judah Mintz, of course, priced all the way up there at 8.6. He's fantastic. He's got high upside. He won't back down from this matchup. A luxury play to be certain. But it's interesting that 2 bench players are the next highest roster or highest salaried options on this team. Malik Brown does have a nice fantasy point per minute number. If he ever were to jump into the starting lineup and knowingly get 30 plus minutes, he is a slate breaker at that price. Off the bench playing 20 minutes, not so much. Quadir Copeland, I'm hesitant to go to him. 6'2" kind of allows us to stay away from that. We saw early in the season, he had this super strong game where I was like, wow, Copeland's going to be a guy. They played him 27 minutes. He was like 3-3, right? Very next game against Canisius, plays just 16 minutes, had a pretty awful outing. Although at 3-3, 11 points isn't a death sentence, but clearly we were wanting more, right? So it's really hard for me to now pay that 6.2 price point for him coming off the bench. He's playing really well, and one of those games was against Oregon in a really decisive victory for Syracuse, 83-63, in which he had 15, 9, and 5. He's playing as well as anyone on this team. But I just have a real hang-up about using guys who aren't starting because those minutes might be sporadic. If you tell me he's going to play 35 or something like that, then yeah, 6.2 becomes a really low price for what he's able to do. But if you're telling me he's going to play 24, I don't know that I'm going to have him projected for 30 plus fantasy points like he's been doing the last couple of games. So something to be aware about there. That has harmed JJ Starling. His last 2 games, he's been under 20 fantasy points, and it has harmed Justin Taylor, who his last 2 games or his last 3 games, he's hit 20 just once out of those 3. I don't really like the Syracuse team. DFS standpoint, it's really hard to peg. They're very erratic, inconsistent. Chris Bell was having some really outlandish performances that pushed his price over 6K, just laughable. I don't think he's ever really, truly in play. And you look at his logs, you'll see why. Same with Naheem McLeod. He's had some big games. I do think they will need him for more minutes here if he can handle them. Now, there's foul issues. There's conditioning issues. He's not able to play these large minutes, but they're definitely going to need him against the size that Pittsburgh does have on their roster. And then our guy, Benny Williams, sitting there at 4-1, just what I thought he would be at this point is not what we're seeing. And I don't know that it's necessarily all his fault. He's partially to blame, especially with the suspension stuff that happened, but he hasn't got the nurturing that he probably could have gotten in another program. So I remain puzzled as why he has not transferred yet. All right, next up, Liberty versus Alabama. This is a weird one. Alabama, we know, plays at a disturbingly at times fast pace. They're all about that new school basketball. You shoot from long range or you get a dunk /layup. Mid range does not exist with this Alabama team. They're 9.5-point favorites against Liberty. The total is 153.5. We'll open up Alabama's Ken Palm page here. 32 in tempo ranking. They're the number one offense per Ken Palm's rankings, 91st in defensive efficiency. They do a lot of stuff well, but that's not necessarily translating to wins. They are 7-5 and have lost 4 of their last 5, but they do have a murderer's row of a non-con that they played. Purdue, Creighton, Arizona, Clemson, Ohio State, Oregon. They have really played a tough schedule. So that's going to help them if they end up being like a bubble team or, like last 4 in or whatever, that their non-con schedule will probably carry them. But if they have a really horrific SEC season, I don't know if this team will end up being as good as we think they are as a lock for the tournament. They get those transfers in, and Aaron Estrada, who's great at Hofstra, hasn't been great at Alabama. He's been serviceable. And then Grant Nelson, who transfers from North Dakota State, he's been better than Aaron Estrada, but he's still not quite putting up those 20 rebound games that he was doing at North Dakota State. And they kind of warned against that when he plays this upper tier competition, he's not going to be doing that, and he hasn't throughout the course of his career. We're also seeing him suffer minor injuries throughout games, and bangs and bruises and bumps and all that stuff. It's really tough. He's almost 7 foot, under 230. Any physical front court is just going to manhandle him, and they have. The Alabama team is priced pretty much where you expect, although they did do the whole Walmart special, hey, $20, nah, $19.99, okay, I can do that. So you have all these prices for guys under 8K, which is going to make them relatively appealing and going to put them in that price bucket where they might see a bit of ownership. Mark Sears sitting there at 7.9 after being priced at 9K at points this season. That's something, I try to analyze or look at people's lineups or ownership on certain number on players and look for trends and all that stuff. And I have noticed that players who had 9K or higher, salaries that are below a certain threshold do see a spike in ownership. And I talk about buy low opportunities all the time. So it makes sense. Mark Sears has been, obviously the best player on this team, the most consistent. Last year, it didn't come together for him. He was a stud at Ohio for years. He was serviceable last year, but clearly on a Alabama team that, he was 3rd, 4th, 5th option at times. Between Brandon Miller and Javon Quinterly, he just didn't get the ball. And when he did, he was just having to pass off. Now he's got a better role like he'd had at Ohio, high usage rate, high shot rate. He's absolutely scorching from long range at 45%. His assist rate's as high as it's been in years, and he's drawing over 6 fouls per 40. So Mark Sears has been fantastic and is well worth the 7.9 price point, considering we're getting a discount on him. Aaron Estrada at 7.3, I would have said, hell yeah, give me all the Aaron Estrada at that price. Now, he did put up a big 40 banger against EKU recently in a major blowout win, but I'm not ready to necessarily jump to him at the 7.3 price and be like, okay, here's Hofstra, Aaron Estrada, let's go. I want to see a couple more games like that, and by the time we get that consistency, he's going to probably be priced out anyways, so I'm just not looking at Aaron Estrada as a realistic play for me on this slate, or at least right now. Grant Nelson at 6.9 could foresee some rostership there, slipping under 7K. That is, again, a price point that people focus on. Has forward, eligibility. This is a matchup that's not necessarily tier A, which is what I try to stay away from when it comes to Grant Nelson. This Liberty team is a average rebounding squad. They do have a solid defense. They are efficient on offense for the most part. So they will give Alabama a game, and Ken Palm has it 83-74 in favor of Alabama. I just think this is a spot where Grant Nelson could definitely perform. I still really like Rylan Griffin. Arizona game, I did have exposure there. He had 12, and then, of course, he pops off for 35 against EKU. Typical, really typical, 5.5. We're laying off at that price, but I do really like Ryan Griffin. I think he has a ton of upside. I honestly think if Estrada doesn't find consistency as we get into the SEC schedule, we could see Ryan Griffin take on a even higher role in the pecking order, more minutes. He's already starting, but I could see him usurp Estrada there and surprise some people. You have Nick Pringle, high fantasy point per minute player, high foul rate. Always to deal with him, 4.9. He's definitely in play. GPP, look, if you can get him 25 minutes, which is a big stretch, he is a slate breaker. Then you have the cheapies such as Sam Walters, who was really needed against Arizona, played 20 minutes against them, took 5 threes, had 18.5 fantasy points. His price sits there at 4K. Played 21 against EKU, obviously got to shoot some threes, rebounded really well against them, put up 27. It's clear at this point that Coach Oates has to give minutes to Sam Walters, and it's going to have to happen now. Seeing him play 20 against Arizona, that was a bit eye-opening for me. You know, he barely played against Purdue, barely played against Creighton. These are games that Bama is going to have to win when they get into the SEC schedule. They can't afford to have a falter against a Vanderbilt, or, you know, they get foul trouble or someone gets hurt. They got to throw Sam Walters out there and he gets starry-eyed against Kentucky. So you have to get him more reps. You have to get him minutes. You have to continue to play him around that 18 to 20 minutes. It's just stupid if they don't. So at 4K, I certainly like Sam Walters. I think he is a main team, or in the conversation for a main team lineup. Even as a, typical bench piece who is going to cap out at most around 20 probably, but he has the downside for playing less. I am seeing a shift here though, and I do truly believe Sam Walters continues to play more. Does have a shot rate almost at 18%, shooting 50% from deep, 14 of 28. You guys remember during their offseason, exhibition games, he was absolutely making it rain. Kid has all the talent in the world. Just needs to get more minutes. So make it happen, Coach Oates. Make it happen. Other youngster, Davin Cosby, not ready for big minutes just yet. Played 19 against EKU. You saw how well he did hit 4 of 6 from long range. He is a for the future play, but I do like Davin Cosby long term. Latrell Wrightsell, who had a spot start recently, has been playing around 18 to 20 minutes, sitting there at 4-5. He's just not working out on this team. The dynamics of this team, he hasn't fit in the way that I think he probably thought he would. Going from a guy at Cal State Fullerton in which he got every shot he wanted, he was the alpha, 31% shot rate, 27% usage rate, going into a role player type of situation, it has not been easy on him. So he's not really a factor for me at 4-5. We get him back to like 3-5, 3K, we can have that conversation. And then Mo Weg, minutes diminishing for Mo. That coincides with Pringle being back and also Walter seeing an increase. So Mo is on the sidelines at 4.8 for us as well. On the Liberty side, we don't have Darius McThree anymore. That's a sad, sad time. He was always so fun for this Liberty team. You're probably not super familiar with who they have now. There are some faces that have returned from Darius McThree team, and this Liberty team under Richie McKay is 10-3. So they're kind of quietly putting together another solid season. Wins over Wichita State, Vermont, and Furman, which is always a tough out. A blowout loss to Florida Atlantic, close loss to Charleston, and a close loss to a very good Grand Canyon team that looks to me like a first-round upset type specials group. So, and they're only projected to lose by KenPom by 9 against a Bama team, right? So I do like Liberty. The starting group that they are going to roll out there, Zach Cleveland, Colin Porter, Kyle Rode, Joseph Vincent, and Caden Matheny. Porter, Rode, Vincent, and Cleveland, all guys who got minutes last year in a smaller capacity. They still have Shiloh Robinson, who feels like he's been on the team forever, and Brody Peebles. Typically going to be looking at a 6 to 7 man rotation. We appreciate you, Coach McKay. Kyle Rode leads the team in shot rate at 30%, 26% shot or usage rate, 38% from long range on 82 attempts. Caden Matheny playing 79% of the minutes. He does shoot 41% from long range on 69 attempts. Zach Cleveland, over 23% usage rate. He has a combined rebounding rate of 29% and assist rate of 25.3%. When it comes to Liberty, I'm really only looking at those top three guys, and they're priced accordingly. The matchup's great against Bama because of their play style and how they want to pace up. Anytime a team like this who plays a significantly slower style or tempo, you usually want to look to them because of those extra possessions that we expect. I think Bama will be able to force their pace a little bit more than Liberty. Problem here, road at 7-4. That's not going to happen. He did put up almost 40 against Utah Valley recently, but you look at his logs and the minutes that he actually gets, and his lack of overall peripherals. Like, he's got games where he scored 18 to 20 real and still barely eclipsed 20 fantasy points. That's a big problem. I don't see any possible way he can run 7-4. Watch him go off now, but honestly, that's just not a very good play. I do like Zach Cleveland, not because he put up nearly 50 last game, but because he has had some upside games, especially throughout different points of the season, not just recently, but throughout the last 2 months. Was solid against Vermont, almost 40. Wichita State team that he had 25 against. He was very good, and 25 fantasy points with 0 real points. I wanted to make sure to hit on that so you understood. Zach Cleveland is the opposite of Kyle Road in that he doesn't necessarily have to score any real buckets, although he can. 19 real points in their last game. He doesn't need to because of those strong peripheral rates. We're talking about the it's not a real triple-double, but we always say, like, he's a threat for a triple-double. It's not going to happen. It's like the mini triple-double. We got to come up with some fancy, catchy name for it. But the 12, 7, and 7 stat line, the Braden Smith special, Cleveland's capable of doing that. And I think in this spot against Bama, we're looking at a guy who may have 8, 9, 10 assists, 5, 6, 7, 8 rebounds. If those shots are falling, he's going to put up a big score. And I think Zach Cleveland is a really sneaky option because he's priced at 7-2. Is a forward. We like it. But I feel pretty good about him overall. I don't think anybody's going to be rostering Zach Cleveland on this stage. So that he's not quite the posh play at this very moment. We still have, another 4 or 5 games to talk about, but I'm very high on Zach Cleveland for what it's worth. Hayden Matheny is only 6K. He's a little bit more of a reasonable, easier play to get to, but we have another guy who's typically reliant on his scoring ability. He is going to play over 30 minutes. We know that. Should be those extra possessions. I think he's fine at 6K. I honestly think he's probably a pretty fat lock for 4X. I'd be shocked if he didn't hit at least 23, 25 fantasy points somewhere in there at 6K. Not the biggest upside in the world, but a relatively safer look there. And then you have the sub 6K options there, the Vincents, the Porters of the world. Vincent, he's pretty consistent there at the 5K price. So I could see some ownership there. Rates aren't the greatest, but he is a regular member of the rotation that's going to be on the floor a lot. Doesn't have to do a whole lot to pay off 5K there when he's playing 28 to 29 minutes, but there is some risk there. He's a very good rebounder, but scoring can sometimes be sporadic. All right. Before we get into Creighton Marquette here, what's up, Don Play? I have a question. Do you think Marquette will cover -3.5 tomorrow? I want to move on them. Line is kind of sneaky, but I like Marquette. Creighton is Fuga. Creighton, I have been accused of being a Creighton hater in the past. I'm not really. And then they made a deep tournament run last year that kind of shut me up. But yeah, I'm not a real big believer in this Creighton team. And I know a lot of people are. They have mega talent for sure. But it just seems like when moments get tough or, they have some adversity, it just seems like you can't trust them, and they have the pieces to do well, but the same problem as last year has materialized in that they don't have a reliable bench. You subtract Nemhard for Stephen Ashworth, who has been playing better lately, I guess, but really has not been anywhere near the Utah State version of himself, and certainly not replicating the Nemhart production that they lost. So really, you've got Baylor Shireman, Trey Alexander, and Ryan Kalkbrenner, and then you have a bunch of role players. They're even in a worse situation as they were last year. But I didn't like their team last year, and they made a deep run. But I sometimes get hung up on depth too much, but I think that this is a very tough spot for them for sure. So I would agree. Looking at the Marquette Creighton numbers here. DK actually has at -4 in favor of Marquette, 151.5 total. The story on Marquette here: 14th in defense per KenPom, 24th in offense, 100th in tempo ranking. 10-3, solid record. They got undressed by Providence, bounced back well against Georgetown. Also, a tough loss against Wisconsin and a close neutral court loss to Purdue. This is a good team, obviously. Going up against Creighton, this is going to be a real nice early in the conference season litmus test for both Creighton and Marquette. And I do think Marquette ultimately comes through here. There has been issues for Stevie Mitchell, has caused Chase Ross to start. Now, Ross had some nice early games as a starter, kind of struggled against Providence. Then he ended up with 4 steals against a pretty bad Georgetown team. He's been great as a starter. But Stevie Mitchell, his status has been moved from doubtful to questionable to now available with that hamstring issue. And he is cheaper than his counterpart, Chase Ross, who has been starting in his spot. Mitchell comes in at 4.6. I don't know that I want to play him right off the he's missed almost 3 weeks. A hammy can be a tough situation, and he's not really that great of a DFS option anyways. At 4.8 5K, we were never really talking about him and using him. He's not a high usage guy. He's not going to produce a lot. He might fall into some rebounds, but there's going to be a lot of fit bidding, as they say, with Stevie Mitchell. And if he's not starting, you really can't touch him. But if he jumps back in the starting lineup for Chase Ross and you're desperate for value, I get it. We had the nut game from David Joplin, but so did 70% of the field at 3.9. This was a perfect example of buying low on a guy. Joplin had been relatively mediocre, stepping into a bigger role, starting role this year. They take Maxence Prosper and goes to the NBA. They fill his role with David Joplin, and he struggled. Coming off the bench, high usage role, didn't have to worry about sharing the sugar, as they say. And he's really struggled now in this starter role because he's not the alpha with that group. But he went absolutely nuts with 29 and a block, 38 fantasy points at 3.9, has caused his price to jump up to 5.5, hit 4 threes. This will be a situation where everybody jumps off because of the price increase, but I kind of want to ride Joplin. I think this is the kind of game where he comes into it confident after last time, and they're going to definitely need his scoring. They're a lot more dangerous with Joplin hitting shots confidently. There's going to be those stretches where Cam Jones just isn't making shots, and he's been struggling the last couple of games with that. Tyler Kolek is, when you think of 3-point shooting, he's semi-elite, 44% on 46 attempts. But to me, it always seems like, Kolek, he's going to be generating, points at the free throw line. He's going to be driving. He's going to be making things happen. He's not going to settle. And he needs somebody to be able to kick out to. And that was Joplin in the last game. Oso Ighodaro, he goes through his struggles, not a 3-point shooting big man very often. He does a lot of his work down low. They need something or someone to open up the paint for him by hitting shots. Enter David Joplin. So I don't think that it's time to just jump off him at the 5.5 price. I think it might make a lot of sense to rerun him here. Gives you a forward slot to fill. And going against a Creighton team that, outside of Baylor Shireman historically hasn't rebounded all that well. Joplin can contribute in the rebounding categories, and I think he's just a very solid overall look. Do I think he's going to put up, nearly 40 again? Probably not, but I do think he can pay off this 5.5 spot, especially if he gets hot, hits 2, 3, 4 triples. He's going to pay it off. Speaking of which, Kolek, love him usually. He's almost 9K now. He's fine if you want to get there, not a priority. And Iguodala at 6'7" is a very nice price there if you think he can stay out of foul trouble and get Kalkbrenner instead in foul trouble, which Kalkbrenner really, for his size and shot blocking ability, he doesn't really like to bang all that much. So I think Oso could get away with maybe bodying him to a degree, which makes him an interesting GBP look at 6'7". On the Creighton side, like I said, it's really just three pieces. Do you want to roster Baylor Shireman at 8'7"? He's been great. Trey Alexander at 8'3", who has been great. Then he wasn't. Now he is again. And then Ryan Kalkbrenner at 8'2", who has the capability of fully breaking the slate with his shot blocking abilities. He's also been rebounding pretty consistently lately. 8 rebounds in 3 straight games. Hello, Ryan. Are you going to be sucking us into some rebounding props here soon or what? And he's been good. The A2 price, I could see him actually pulling down some ownership there. Now, I keep wanting to sell this Marquette DVP because theoretically they should struggle against big men like Ryan Kalkbrenner, but they haven't. Also, Iguodala has been very, very physical, and he's played at a brute level that I wasn't expecting from him. So I continued to target front court players against Marquette thinking that they're going to eat, and they just haven't been. So again, we're in that same spot with Marquette where Kalkbrenner should absolutely go off, but fouls are a risk here. And this Marquette defense, I got to hand it to them. They've been better than I thought they would be. And I don't want to keep rolling out expensive front court guys just to get a 2x return. If I'm using anybody, I think it's Trey Alexander. He's just, man, so very good. Dynasty-wise, got him his first year, got impatient, had a chance to make a big trade for a senior that I don't have anymore, and I kind of wish I had Trey Alexander still. Looking at his rates, phenomenal across the board, playing 87% of the minutes out of necessity. Who else do they have? 26% usage rate, 27% shot rate. Now, he's only making 28% of his threes on 57 attempts. That's going to have to change, especially when he shot 41% last year on 161 attempts. Now, you would expect that number to positively regress, at least to 35-ish%. Now, his freshman season at Creighton, he did attempt 64 threes, only made 28% of them. So reverted back to that a little bit. I do think that starts to level out, and he plays really well. He's the best three-point shooter in the Big East last year. So he's not suddenly forgot how to do so. It's just going through a slump in that regard. But he's still a high-level passer, racking up assists, can rebound, very sneaky rebounder, much like Baylor Shireman was a couple years ago before people understood what he actually did. And he contributes stocks as well. So Trey Alexander is the guy that I would prefer here, but I recognize 8.3 as a price that may be tough to get to. All right. Wow, I must be tired. I thought you were the same person. What's up, Trevor? Sorry. Ashworth hasn't panned out like they planned. That team goes as Kalkbrenner goes. Yeah, Ashworth, man, big time. There's been a tremendous amount of disappointments and surprises. Welcome to college basketball, right? But yeah, I don't know if anyone could have seen Ashworth not working out like this, especially with how good he's been. Creighton is just, they're so doomed without their depth, and trading Nembhard for Ashworth, it just isn't working. God forbid they get anyone in foul trouble of their main three or an injury, and Creighton's going to be really dead to rights. All right, next game on the slate here, Indiana State, the Sycamores, Larry Bird University versus Michigan State, a classic matchup. Michigan State, I felt really good about a future that I got on them like 2 days after the tournament ended. And I got a future for them just to make the Final Four, because I had a really strong suspicion that Izzo was going to bring back all his key pieces. And I did think that, to get another Hauser, they would go into the portal. That didn't really happen. Upgrades weren't necessarily made for this team. They've got some really nice youngsters in sophomore Trey Holloman and freshman Jeremy Fears, but you guys, I'm sure everyone knows Fears got shot recently. He's fine, recovering in the hospital, but clearly not going to be playing basketball for a while. That hurts. They're just a few days away from going into full conference play This is their last tune-up before Thursday, January 4th against Penn State. Penn State DVP, that's going to test me. Michigan State Bigs, we don't like them. What are we going to do? 79.70 is the Ken Pom projection for this, which might surprise some of you, but at this point, if you've been watching Michigan State basketball, it really probably shouldn't surprise you whatsoever. Indiana State's absolutely live in this game. Now, Michigan State is 9-point favorites on DK. It's a total of 151. And scenarios in which Michigan State loses here are a Indiana State offense that has been really solid, top 35 in the country. They shoot a lot of high percentage shots. They're an elite three-point shooting team. They're very dangerous. If they get hot and Michigan State just kind of lollygags around like they've done, the Sycamores are alive to not only cover, but win outright. They haven't lost since November 10th against Alabama. They lost 102-80 in that one. Now, they haven't played a very good non-conference schedule. They beat the doors off my Rice guys. You know, I'm a big Rice fan. Max Fielder, Travis Evie. Beat a solid Toledo team on a neutral floor by 2 points. That was actually a pretty good win. And then they beat Ball State, which always fields a competitive roster for the most part. So not a lot of competitive or tier A opportunities here. So this is a big one for them. The Missouri Valley Conference is typically a strong mid-major conference. You don't want to necessarily see those teams in your first round matchups. And this is a year where, Drake, who a lot of people have pegged, Belmont's always competitive. Northern Iowa's interesting. You have my guys, Missouri State, my dude Chance Moore. Like, this is going to be a fun Missouri Valley Conference season. So this will be a big one. If Indiana State can beat Michigan State going into conference play, they're going to have some pep in their step, and they're going to put the rest of the league on notice. Looking at the Sycamores, because I don't think we've had them on a slate this year, maybe one. The starting five for them is as follows: Ryan Conwell, Isaiah Swope, Robbie Avila, Jason Kent, and Julian Larry, and then important bench piece Xavier Bloodson, who has played for Indiana State for a few seasons now, has been a very solid three-point shooter for years, turned himself into an elite three-point shooter this season, has had some spot starts. He started the first couple of games of the year and did start against Bama, but they've been bringing him off the bench in this kind of like second unit gunner role. And it's worked out for the most part. He did start a couple of games going to Southern Indiana, and then they brought him back off the bench, most recently there against Tennessee State, in which he played 25 minutes off the bench, scored 16 real points in a relatively easy win over that team. Looking at the prices for the Sycamores and what we can actually realistically get to. Bloodson is only 4.8. If he were to be in the starting lineup, because like you said, it's been sporadic, he has started some few games, I think at 4.8, he would be the Sycamore that I would want. He just won't be afraid to chuck against this Michigan State team. His rates are not as strong as some of his teammates like Conwell and Swope, but he does have a usage rate over 20%. He is shooting 43%, as I mentioned, from long range. A lot of guys on this team are. He has an assist rate of 23%. He draws about 4 fouls per 40, a steal rate of almost 2%. He's just a really solid look there at 4.8. He's still playable even if he doesn't start, but you have to really temper expectations, and I think that's getting into unnecessarily risked territory there. So we'll wait to see what the starting lineup is for the second wave of games, and that one in particular. Robbie Avila sitting there at 7.5. That's a tough one. He did put up 50 recently. He could certainly put up a big one here, but we're paying a premium. He does lead the team in usage at 25.4%, and he's also shooting 47% from long range on 32 attempts, 26% combined rebounding rate, 26.7% assist rate, drawing 5 fouls per 40. Robbie Avila is a type of player that I love. I call them the Derek Walker archetype. They're playing that quarterback role. They do some high post. They're getting their shots down low, but they're also, setting up their teammates. They're hitting them out of double teams, and he's surrounded by 3-point shooters. He also himself can shoot from long range. Very impressive player. He plays a lot like Rice's Max Fiedler. I just love those guys. like I said, 7.5's a little bit of a steep price there, but I do think he can pan out really well here in the way that he's played, and the style that he plays shouldn't be a real problem for any of Michigan State's front court options that have to guard him. Next up, we have Isaiah Swope, who comes in at 6'7", been a very steady producer. He himself has also hit some 50s on the year. He has the highest shot rate on the team at 28.5%. And when you know it, another 43% three-point shooter on 79 attempts and a steal rate of 3.5%. I don't know, but I'm really, really high on this Sycamores team for not only betting purposes, but I'm almost feeling like a mini stack, like two, not going crazy with 3 or 4, but two players from this team could honestly pan out. Ryan Conwell there at 6'4". He's a very nice, balanced mid-range type of look that you can feel okay about using in all formats. Wasn't particularly great in their last game, but that's because they had some real explosion performances. The game before that against Ball State, he got hot, took 19 shots, scored 27 real, put down 40 fantasy points to the board. So Ryan Conwell is also very, very strong of a play in all formats. He's shooting 38% from long range. He's not in the 40 club, but he's getting close, and he has a shot rate of 26.4%, second on the team. Lastly, you have Julian Larry, who's shooting 60% from long range on 20 attempts. He doesn't have the attempts of some of his teammates, but he is playing 82.5% of the available minutes. He has one of the highest offensive ratings on the team, top 35 in true shooting percentage as well. So you do have another look here in Larry. He's 6'5". I don't like him as much as Conwell, but he does have a rock solid floor because of his rates across the board, and somebody to definitely consider. And then lastly, you have Jason Kent, who is priced at 4.8, a very fair price there. I could see him drawing some ownership. Top 50 offensive rating, 5th best true shooting percentage, shoots minimal threes, but he has made 7 of 17, which puts him above 40%. Has a rebounding rate of 17.9% defensive, 7% offensive. He is a pretty solid look here at that sub 5K price point. There's a little downside there. He has pretty good rates. We just read those off, but he has some downside here as well. Guard forward eligibility, which brings him back to the higher end of our priority pool because we can have that flexibility to roster him where we want. But there is a foul issue that could rear its ugly head, and that is the main worry I would have with him. It's not the highest in the world, just under 4, but there are some games where he has picked up, especially recently, the 2 first-half fouls, and then end up with 3. So, of course, he could have played, but that is something that could cost him some first-half minutes there. But really, there are 5 to 6 options on this Indiana State team that you could use depending on your build, and I think come away feeling pretty good about it. Now, I'm not suggesting, again, that you roster their whole starting 5. Could be interesting, but I think 1 or 2 of them makes a lot of sense here against the Spartans. For Michigan State, you know the drill. Tyson Walker, typically the guy you want to roster. He'd been pretty cheap there for a few weeks, put up a big game against Baylor in a almost maybe a turning point to Michigan State's season. Like, they had to have that. Coming off back-to-back losses against Wisconsin and Nebraska, they could not afford to get their doors blown off against Baylor, and they turned around and they beat that Baylor team's ass. And then they followed up with a strong win against Oakland, and in their last game there against Stoney. So they're playing well. Do I want to pay $8K for Tyson Walker? I don't. There's just not been enough other stats besides his scoring to really kind of, entice me there. Coming from Northeastern, he was always a pretty high assist rate guy. It's sitting about 18.2% this year. His first year at Michigan State, where he was a primary ball handler and facilitator, his assist rate was 36%. At Northeastern, 33.7%. But that number's been down around 18% the last 2, and he's been shooting a lot more, focusing on his offense, and that's not necessarily an indication of him being selfish. It's more of an indication of they don't have anybody else who consistently put the ball in the hole, and he's forced to do so. You have A.J. Hoggard, who is dealing with confidence issues constantly, although it seems he may have put those behind him. last 5 games, he's hit at least 25 fantasy points. 3 of the last 5, he's been over 30. So Hoggard starting to look like a guy again, priced at 7.4. I'll take a wait and see approach there. He was in that mid 6K range then. If you weren't using him at that price, why would you start now at 7.4? There's just a little bit too much downside there. If he continues to play well and into conference play, we can revisit that stance. And then Jaden Akins, who sits there at 5.8, he needs to really be cheaper. Now, he did put up almost 30 in their last game, and he took a bunch of threes. He's made 7 of his last 14 threes in the past 2 games. But he is extremely scoring reliant, as we know. Now, the 5.8 price is a little cheaper than what we normally get him at, but I don't know that we can really be paying anything above 5.2, 5.5 for Jaden Akins because of his role and what he's going to actually give us. I always like Malik Hall. He's usually our sneakier option whenever he's priced in the low 5K range. 5.8 is a little bit tougher for me to get to. He hasn't been great over the last 3 games, but he does take a lot of shots. He suffers for confidence issues as well. We see him pass up open looks at times, and that's when it really makes you feel sick. The Nebraska game, he wasn't afraid to chuck, and you saw how well he did. So I think Malik Hall is worthy of a spot in some of your MME builds, but he's far from a priority here at 5.8. Now, with no Jeremy Fears, I would like to really seriously consider Trey Holloman, a primary guy off the bench, 22 minutes, 19, 18, 19, and 20 over his last 5. So here's a guy that we can pretty much bank on 20 minutes minimum, and he might even see more here against Indiana State. Now, production hasn't really been there for him until recently. 16-plus fantasy points in 3 straight games. 2 of his last 3, he's been over 20. One of which was against Baylor in that big blowout where he had 11 to 1 assist, 1 block, and 2 steals. Also hit a couple threes for good measure. He's hit 6 threes in his last 3 alone, and he's playing with a lot of confidence right now. So I do like Trey Holloman. He's actually probably the most likely of any Michigan State guy to make my main lineup. Not sure I'll actually end up going there, but there's real merit to using him right now. 18.4% shot rate, and he's shooting 46% from long range on 35 attempts. I suspect, looking around the rest of the team, you've got Jaden Akins shooting 35%, Walker 37%, Hoggard 28%, Xavier Booker 31%. He's actually taken 19 of them. Malik Hall 20%. Nobody out there making threes. Keep the defense honest. Who can actually shoot? Trey Holloman. You need to give Trey Holloman minutes, and you need to continue to do so, Mr. Izzo. Not that I would question a Hall of Fame coach, but sometimes he does things that just make me want to pull my hair out, right? So Holloman is the guy that I'm really looking at there. I especially without Fears, hate what happened there to him. Fears playing about 15 to 20 minutes pretty consistently there in the last half month of the season. Those minutes, I think, could easily get routed over to Holloman. And if he were to play, not saying he will, but 30 minutes, for example, he becomes a big slate breaking option. So we'll see how that works out. He's just somebody that is in the player pool for us, though. Virginia Tech versus Wake Forest. Wake Forest defensively, no bueno. They're 4-point favorites here against Virginia Tech, 144.5 total. Now, Wake Forest has some absolute studs when it comes to DFS purposes. Andrew Carr is having a monster season. Starting out, our guy Cam Hildreth was going absolutely nuts. He's kind of leveled off. Hunter Salas is who he is. He's going to, take shots, and he's going to have some spike games. He's also going to have some floor games. 7-3 might be a little bit too high for him, especially in this matchup. And then you have Boopy Miller, who is another higher usage guy that's, going to facilitate, but also be hunting shots. He's been really good the last month of the season, 7-7. It's a bit of a high price again for the matchup. I think for GPP wise, it makes a ton of sense to go to Cam Hildreth because Salas and Boopy have taken a lot of the usage away from him. He still contributes in all other categories, and we know he has legitimate slate breaking upside where he can put up 50 to 60 at any time. So we haven't got him this cheap at all this season. We're used to last year having him. I usually just hit his PRA. He was a monster, taking us to the window on his over 21.5 PRA, 20, 19.5. Hasn't really been the case this year, but he's still really, really good, very active, getting a lot of minutes, taking a lot of shots. Cam Hildreth at 6'7" is a very intriguing GPP option. And then you have Efton Reed at 5'7", who's going to have his hands full with some of these Virginia Tech front court players. Foul's a very real possibility here for Efton Reed, but he's a strong option at 5'7". Since getting eligible right before the whole Ray battle and NCAA giving up, 27 minutes in his debut against Rutgers, 12 points, 14 rebounds, on his way to 40. Now, he didn't play very well against NJIT. In the game after that, 2 blowouts he was rough in. The Presbyterian blowout, though, he had 14, 8, and 5 blocks and looked a lot better. And I saw some metric tweets earlier from some Wake Forest beats talking about the best possible lineup and what Efton Reed has actually given them. And they are just so much better with him on the floor. He's finally getting his opportunity, and we saw at LSU. He had all the talent in the world, just never had the chance at consistent minutes, and now he is. But I think fouls are at least making him somewhat risky in this spot against Virginia Tech. But at sub 6K, I feel pretty good about utilizing him there. He's not a slam dunk play, but he's very much in the conversation. Now, on the Virginia Tech side, who could possibly give Efton Reed foul troubles? What could happen? What are we talking here? By the way, Ken Palm has a 74-71 in favor of Virginia Tech, in favor of Wake Forest. Lynn Kidd, who has been absolutely phenomenal this year. I don't know anyone who could really sit here and claim to know that they saw the Lynn Kidd explosion coming with a straight face or without me just calling them a liar, because he never showed this level. I mean, he's always been a great rebounder. He blocks shots, but his scoring has taken a whole nother level. Barely played his freshman season at Clemson, comes to Virginia Tech where he barely plays in year 2, has a pretty nice 2023 where he's at least suitable as a second unit guy. And now he steps into a spot where he's getting minutes and he's just absolutely crushing. 25.2% shot rate, 25% usage rate, a top 50 offensive rating. He has the second best true shooting percentage in the entire galaxy at the collegiate level, and has a combined rebounding rate of 39%, drawing 6 fouls per 40. And he's only getting 2.4 fouls per 40 called. So he's been able to avoid the foul trouble thus far, although in his lone conference game, he did get into massive trouble, but still put up 19 and 4 against, I believe it was Louisville. Not playing a huge amount of minutes, high fantasy point per minute guy, very efficient guy. If he were to play 32 minutes, which I'm not sure he can, conditioning wise, he would put up a 50. It's just the way he is playing and how efficient. It's ridiculous. And you saw against American, 31 and 11 in 24 minutes, 14 of 15 from the field, 52 fantasy points. It's unreal how good he is. I don't know that I'm paying the 8-1 price, but Wake Forest defensively, they have holes. They've got leaks. Lynn Kidd could have a great one here. And if he gets Efton Reed into foul trouble early, he'll be completely unimpeded and just detonate against this Wake Forest team. So don't write him off at that 8-1 price. He could definitely still pan out. Sean Padula is available after missing the last 2 weeks of the season. Padula sitting there at 6'6". It's an interesting price for him. He's really not looked great over the last month of the season. He started off extremely hot. I think he's worth a look in GPPs, but coming off an injury, just to plug him into your main, I think that's a little bit too lean there. Hunter Couture at 6'1", you know what you're getting with him, primarily a scorer, although he'll contribute in other categories, but he's just kind of a guy there at that 6'1" price point. We have Robbie Barron as a value at 4-5, playing 20 minutes. He has scored 20 plus fantasy points in 3 straight. You have MJ Collins, who did miss a game here. They're playing about 20 minutes in a low usage role. He's cheap. And then the youngster Brandon Rechsteiner, who played 30 minutes against American, 23 minutes against Vermont, and 28 minutes against Valpo. However, with Padula's prime to come back, we probably see Rechsteiner go back to obscurity, at least for right now. If he were to remain a starter or Padula had a setback at 3-6, I do like Rex Steiner because I want to target against Wake Forest. I don't necessarily love this Virginia Tech team for it, but Wake Forest defensively, they're going to bleed fantasy points at multiple positions, and we want to target against them. It's a little bit tough to trust any of these Virginia Tech guys. A guy like Tyler Nickel, who has shown flashes, but also has a negative floor. It's hard to use. So I think it's really probably Lynn Kidd or bust. And it's a huge opportunity cost there, especially if, God forbid, he gets into foul trouble. Or a Rex Steiner, Robbie Barron, value special there. But we definitely want to target against Wake Forest when possible. All right, we have Kansas and we have Wichita State. This is a big time in the TBT, a rivalry game. I don't know how many of you are, follow the TBT tournament, but the $1 million tournament with alumni and overseas players and things of that nature. Anyways, Kansas is a 13-point favorite. 146 is the total. Kansas, looking at the Ken Pom page here, projected 78-66, calling it on a neutral at the T-Mobile Center there, which is in Kansas City, Missouri, I believe. Not too worried. I do think Kansas wins here. I'm a little bit worried about Kansas. And how do you worry about an 11-1 team? Right now, they're just steamrolling opponents and they look great. But it's a lot of difference grinding through the conference schedule early and getting into a win or go home situation. I worry about Kansas because I think they lack the secondary options to be able to outlast a hot opponent. Foul trouble, injuries, any of that stuff. I feel like that could undress Kansas quickly. They lost a ton in the offseason to the transfer portal. Very little used freshmen who are actually going off and playing minutes at their destinations. Coming into it, bringing in Parker Brown. Yeah, it's a feel-good story because of Christian. Nicholas Timberlake, who shot well, scored well at Towson, has been very lackluster. And you've got a couple of freshmen that you're starting to rely on out of necessity. So really, Kevin McCullough has had to do God-tier-like stuff, and he is putting up huge numbers. Hunter Dickinson is putting up nice rebounding numbers, and he's had some big games. A true classic low post presence in a Bill Self offensive system is always going to work out. KJ Adams, not much of a DFS option at the prices that he has become. And then DeJuan Harris, who is on record saying, I can score, but I just don't need to. I think we're going to be getting into territory where he needs to score. And you'll see in games that, they are close and end up winning, he's had some pretty big scoring opportunities. The Kentucky game way back in November, he scored 23 real points, and they held off a very tough charge from that Kentucky squad. 6-8's a tough price, but in games that you think are going to be close, I think we definitely want to use him. I don't know if this is the spot to use him, but I certainly will not be writing him off like a lot of others do. You have the Frosh Elmarco Jackson, who's playing starter minutes at 4-6, going through growing pains, but he's playing those minutes. If you're hard up for value, at least you have a kid that starting and going to be on the floor. They are going to get back the other youngster, Johnny Furphy, who missed a couple of games there. Not a big minute guy. I do think this is a game where they do throw him out there for 15 to 16-ish minutes to get him some more, playing time, acclimated to their system, and just really get jitters out playing. When I played, I don't know about you guys, but before every game, regardless of how many years I played, I always had butterflies or would worry about this, worry about that. And it's just good to play and get those reps and minutes. So I think Furphy's an interesting play at 3-8. I actually think he could contribute quite well. We saw him against UMKC play 15 minutes. He took a couple of threes, hit them, shot 4 of 7, and put together a pretty solid 20 fantasy point performance. So keep an eye on Furphy. He's a nice look. His presence makes Nick Timberlake, I think, an afterthought. Now, I know Nick Timberlake, out of necessity, played 29 minutes against Yale. They were in control of that game from start to finish. Timberlake did take 10 shots. He, for the first time all season, looked like the Towson version that Kansas thought they were getting when they prioritized him over, obviously, what we now know were better transfer portal options. 13-3, put up 23 fantasy points. He's 4K. Do I think that he's going to do that again? No, I don't. 29 minutes would be a stretch, especially with Furphy. Perhaps making the realization that, man, my bench is light. I need to get these guys comfortable. I don't know that he goes back to a 4-minute per game role. Maybe we see Timberlake settle into a 20-minute per game spot, which would be fine for him. And at 4K, that would absolutely be viable. So depends on what you believe there. If Furphy's presence puts him back to non-existence, or if he earned from that one game, 20 plus minutes going forward. More of a GPP look for me. But if you're telling me we're getting Towson Timberlake now, which sounds like a wrestler, I would be all over him at 4K. Wichita State, they've been a very good fantasy team. They have a pretty tight rotation as well, although they've gotten some guys available now that's stretched that out to a degree. Just lost a close one to Kansas State. That was an ugly game. My God, that was an ugly one to watch. Both sides really struggled at times. The K-State side just made more plays, and Tyler Perry ended up having a nice second half. The starting five for this group, typically Colby Rogers, Quincy Ballard, Harlan Beverly, Xavier Bell, and Kenny Poto. They do have Ronnie DeGray now available, waiver ready to go, playing significant minutes, 15 to 20 off the bench. Isaac Abidi, who has all the upside in the world, but not refined, playing about 10 to 15. And then you have Dallin Riginal, who looks like Ronnie DeGray is going to come in and take Dallin's minutes down. Dallin was playing 25, 26, 28 minutes off the bench in a lot of games. And since DeGray has been available, he's dropped down to 14. And that hasn't been from fouls or anything. It's strictly been they're running another guy in the rotation, and it's coming directly out of his minute total. So you can't really use Dallin, even though he was a pretty appealing look and actually paid off more than people probably realize. He's going to get down to like a 4K price. That's really going to put us to the test. At 5-1, he's an easy fade, though. Ronnie DeGray, they're at 3-8. Forward, playing about 20 minutes. Makes a lot of sense. Paid off against K-State. He didn't pay off in his first appearance, but he is playing that 18 to 20-minute guarantee. I like him as a value. Going up against Kansas, maybe not the greatest spot, but 3-8. What can I say, right? I do like the price on Quincy Ballard, but he seems like he'll probably just go into foul trouble against Dickinson. Very high rebounding rate, can block shots, not much of a scorer. If he can stay on the floor, he definitely looks appealing at that. But I think Dickinson ends up getting him into foul trouble. I think Dickinson ends up getting Poto to a degree when he has to check him into foul trouble. So I don't have a lot of interest in the starting front court players for Wichita State. We have seen a real breakout from Harlan Beverly, which I swear to you, 2 or 3 years ago from Miami, he played this well. But 6'6", that's a pretty steep price. I don't think we're paying that. The Xavier Bell price of 6'5", same thing. He was really good for us early in the season, but he's just priced out. Colby Rogers there at 7'4", same kind of deal. It's really Ronnie DeGray or nobody for Wichita State. Just the way that they're playing and the way this game sets up, it's not hugely appealing to me. Now, Harlan Beverly has done really well this season for Wichita State, been a key performer. And then over at Indiana, Anthony Walker is having a monster, which 3 years ago from Miami, he was good. Nobody believes me. It's like it never happened. Could you imagine Miami with this Anthony Walker and this Harlan Beverly? Another team without a bench. But, man, that's got to be painful for Coach Larinaga. All right, last game on the slate, UCLA and Oregon. Now, the Oregon Ducks were on the slate yesterday, and the first day that I really had the projection sheet available and refined, and Kwame Evans was just bursting on that. And we've had some bad experiences with Kwame Evans in the past at FTN. We reluctantly ended up using him because, hey, he's projecting so well, and it turns out he ended up being super chalky at 45%, and he blew the slate apart. If you didn't have Kwame Evans yesterday, you probably didn't do too well. All that did was make his price go from 7K, 7.5 to 8.5 now, which is a very difficult ask against a UCLA team that he can take advantage of. Like Kwame Evans' draft stock is soaring. And a big performance against a listless UCLA team will further kind of push him towards possible lottery status. That's what I'm hearing. All right, the spread here, 7.5 point favorites are the Ducks. Both of these teams are lame. They're lame Ducks, if you will. 136.5 total. You saw my Huskies. They ended up losing to Colorado tonight, but they were pushing them all night. Never mind the fact that they were missing half their team. Colorado was. But Huskies are the team outside of Arizona and Colorado to threaten the Pac-12. Not UCLA, certainly. And I think that we'll end up beating Oregon. So the Ducks fans will have another reason to complain about the Huskies. But Evans at 8.5. He is way too athletic, way too gifted. I mean, he anticipates passing lanes. He blocks shots from like a spot for far back on the court that has no business. Maybe not LeBron chase down blocks, but he's blocking shots from like a half a court away where you're like, whoa, where did that come from? He's rebounding at a high rate. He's now scoring confidently. He's hitting threes confidently. Like this kid, man, he deserves a heat check. The 8.5 is a really tough pill to swallow, but of all the options on Oregon, it's now become Kwame Evans. Like he is that good. We saw Jermaine Cuisinart. He wasn't chalk last slate. He really penalized anyone who rostered him, put up 23 there against USC. That caused his price to dip to 7.1. I do suspect that price point draws a lot of ownership to Cuisinart. And you know my philosophy with Cuisinart, anytime he's industry chalk, I usually fade. It works way more than it doesn't. And there'll be times where the chalk Cuisinart does beat us, and that's fine. But like way more than not, he ends up putting a sub 4x performance together, and it doesn't hurt us that bad. So it's different because, last year we were fading a chalk 5.5 Cuisinart and getting away with it. So why wouldn't I feel okay about fading a 7.1? Especially with the quick maturation of Kwame Evans and the recent development and explosion from Jackson Shelstead. There's just other guys, and Cario Oquendo coming off the bench, scoring a little more efficiently than we've seen out of him in the last couple of seasons. So Jackson Shelstead, he's 6'9". It's a tougher price, but he's playing extremely well too, which means we can get away from a Cuisinart chalk. I don't think he's really all that great of a play, even though I think price-wise will draw people in. Speaking of Oquendo, he's 5'3", high-usage guy, has put up 20-plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4. If you want to go to Oquendo, I don't mind. Totally scoring reliant, not starting, capped around 23 to 25 minutes. Just a middling play. They did get Keyshawn Bartholomew back. He didn't start, but he did play 16 minutes. I suspect he will be over 20 minutes in this UCLA game. That's going to come out of the Jadrian Tracy, pool, maybe some less minutes for Brendan Rigsby. We'll see how that ultimately shakes out. Rigsby has been a viable value at the sub 5K price point that he typically is, but I suspect those minutes will go down, and lately he's just not been very involved in the game anyways. So you have a decision to make. If you want something from the Oregon UCLA game, Evans might be your best look, but I also realize 8.5 is a very tough ask. On the UCLA side, I won't be tricked into using Adim Bana. Maybe some will. Put up 34 against Oregon State. Oregon State is a lot different than Oregon in terms of what beats them. I don't foresee Bana staying out of foul trouble against a more athletic Oregon team, and I certainly don't think he's putting up 30-plus fantasy points. So I'm not going to chase that. 7K. We learned that lesson early in the season. The player I usually look at when the Bruins are on the slate is our man Sebastian Mack, who is a younger player, but is very gifted and is going to be very, very good for a very bad UCLA team. Wasn't great against Oregon State. That'll keep his ownership down, but what it did do is brought his price from a way too high 7.5 to a more manageable 6.8. That does give me intrigue enough to seriously consider using him in some form or fashion in one of my lineups that I'd be rolling out there. He does lead the team in shot rate at 25.2%, has a usage rate of 26.2%, which is slightly behind Adeem Bana at 27.6%. Steal rate over 3%. He's drawing a whopping 7.4 fouls per 40. He gets himself to the foul line at a very high clip, which is great. You love it. And only shooting 26% from long range, but a freshman has more maturing to do, more developing. If he sticks around the program for 2-3 seasons, you're going to be talking about a 9K player. He's that good. The rest of the Bruins rotation, it's really hard to pick because Lazar Stefanovic, the Utah transfer, he's going to play over 30 minutes, but he's not really all that involved. He's more of a role player. He's going to have a lot of empty minutes. Dylan Andrews, we know the case on him. Very inconsistent still to this day as a sophomore. He'll have blow-up games, but for the most part, I try to avoid Dylan Andrews when he's priced above 6K. Then you have Will McClendon, Brandon Williams, Adai Amara, Devin Williams, all these random bench pieces who see spikes in minutes, then they barely play. Berkey, I have his last name pronunciation somewhere in my notes, but I can't find it. So I'll just say Berkey, the Turkish kid, who did get the start. He missed a few games early on, got available, started against Marquette, played 27 minutes. Then they moved him to the bench for a few games. Then he missed a few games, came back against Maryland, played 12 minutes, obviously did enough there to warrant Mick Cronin starting him. And against Oregon State, he got into major foul trouble, played just 14 minutes, but he did start, had 5 points, 2 assists, and a rebound. But 7 fouls in his last 2 games of returning, so you have to be careful with Berkey there. He has a 7 fouls per 40 rate. He is priced at a level where he has the talent to pay off this 4-2. Seeing him in international play, he's been very good, but the collegiate game's a lot different. It's not really working out for him. Health-wise, he's dealing with a nagging ankle injury that's clearly affecting him in a negative way. So even if he starts, I would not have much, if any, interest in using him. In fact, the UCLA team is not a X out for me, but it's pretty close. If I'm not using Mac at 6'8", and I suspect I won't have the salary for him, Bruins are nearly a full fade. Then I'm coming back over to Oregon, trying to figure out a way to play Kwame Evans because I don't think the fun stops yet. I think we're in for another 40-plus performance here against the Bruins. All right, so that wraps up the slate breakdown. Let's talk about core PrizePicks, and then we'll get out of here. Started a little bit late, so we're still making good time. Darlinston Dubar walking all the way back there, talking about the Hofstra kid at 7-2. Great matchup here against the St. John's team that's going to have plenty of fantasy goodness. Dubar is the safest on Hofstra to me because you throw out last game against UNLV, which I know wasn't great for his peripherals, did score 17 real, but typically he's going to give us a lot of assists, a lot of other categories. So Darlinston Dubar is our guy at 7-2. He can rack them up really, really quickly. Core play number 2 and will be the designated posh play of the day. We haven't had one since before Christmas. I don't suspect Blake Hinson to warrant Mitch ownership from people. Typically, he's only chalky in like the easiest of matchups that people perceive. And I think Syracuse, most are still wired to target just simple 3-point shooting guards against them. The high post has been something that a lot of people just can't seem to grasp. So I'm taking Blake Hinson as core play number 2 at 7-3 and also gets the Posh Alexander Posh play of the day modifier, which helps quite a bit. He is core play number 2, and we have 2 guys in the 7K range. So you're already seeing what are we doing here? We're trying to go balanced as much as possible, right? We're probably not going to get the McCullough, Dickinson, Soriano, Thomas plays in, although McCullough has been, like I said, God tier with how good he is, and I do think he'll punish Wichita State, but how much can we actually pay for the guy, considering McCullough just 3-4 years ago at 4-5 was putting up these big numbers as a off-brand role player for Texas Tech. And then the third member of the core, it's a bit of a toss-up. We're going to have to see like starting lineups. Right now, I'm leaning towards one of my favorite values being Sam Walters, but I recognize that's a very lean play if he doesn't actually, break into the starting lineup. Or can we truthfully predict his minutes on a game-to-game basis? But I do really like him and think he is a fantastic option. But core play number 3, I think what we'll do is we'll go with the a cheap St. John's value. We'll stick with this Hofstra game, which is mini stack. If it comes with a caveat, if RJ Lewis starts, he would be core play number 3. If he doesn't, I'm dropping down to Glenn Taylor or trying to find that money to go to Dennis Jenkins, who at 6'6", I do think warrants plenty of consideration. So I know it's a little bit of this or that with the core. I'm usually a little bit more straightforward, but there are some things that I want to see with the starting lineup. One thing's for sure, Blake Hinson and Darlington Dubar, lock of those two guys in all formats. That won't change tomorrow. I'm in on those guys heavy. PrizePicks. Had some good success over the last, couple of weeks with PrizePicks. I am, conference play is when we can really dial in. They start to have softer numbers. They don't have fantasy scores up just yet, but they do have PRA, rebounds, assists, all those good categories. Blake Hinson has a rebounding prop of 5.5. Now, rebound props can be tough. That's just the nature of it. But I do like his ability to put together one of the faux triple doubles where he has like 7 to 8 rebounds, 20 real points, 5 assists, something like that. But I like the over 5.5 rebounds for Blake Hinson. Feel pretty confident and comfortable with that one. Let's see here. Does anyone want to give us a Ray Battle? I was hoping that there it is. Raekwon Battle, who now available for West Virginia, has had a couple of just banger games, slate melting games. Hasn't been on the slate with the Ray Battle just yet, but he's been so phenomenal. He has a point prop of 17.5, which I realize will seem high, but he has just been a one-man wrecking crew. Kurt Kreese is dishing the rock, making sure Raekwon Battle's happy, and he's taking a ton of shots. He's going to continue to score 20 real consistently. So over 17.5 real points for Ray Battle. And then we go over to his PRA where we're going to go over 22.5 PRA for Ray Battle as well. Absolutely love North Seattle kid. Didn't get the real opportunity he probably deserved for when he was at Washington. Did really well at Montana State, and now he's an absolute stud, star, whatever you want to say, whatever hyperbole I can come up with. Ray Battle is just that guy, and he's that damn good. Also like David Joplin over 15 PRA. I mean, it's not really that hard for him to hit that number, even if his shot isn't falling. And then bringing it back to last year with a Cam Hildreth PRA over 21.5. Let's get that, Cam. I think he has a nice little game to remind people of who he is. And then my sneak play, in addition to the posh play. Posh play is already the sneak play. So now we have like the super sneak, which is Zach Cleveland from Liberty. We have a points, rebounding, assist prop of 20.5. Now I feel Zach Cleveland is going to have a really nice game against Alabama. Of all the Liberty guys, he's the one I'm most confident in, and I do think he has 30-plus fantasy points. Whatever combination of that he needs to hit to reach 21 points, rebounds, and assists, he's going to do so. Very confident in Zach Cleveland. There you go. Several prize picks that we can look at. There will be some additional ones in the article that releases in the morning once we have the fantasy point totals released. All right, that brings us to the end of the show. Once again, I appreciate your guys' support. Please, if you have a moment to hit that like button, support us with that. Interacting with the show via on-demand comments or a live chat is huge. Sharing it as you see it with retweets or whatever it is, or just passing the word along. I certainly do appreciate that, and want to thank again the Discord community that we have at FTN, not just in college basketball, but all sports equally, posting news, injury analysis, late scratch information, all of that stuff really is one of the biggest edges remaining when it comes to DFS and getting into opponent and lineup strategies and lineup construction and all that stuff. So appreciate you guys. Thanks very much. We'll be back Monday night. Probably a little bit later than the usual midnight Eastern. Reason being is Monday is a big day for college football. Huskies are going to be taking on Texas. If that one's not over by the time the show would start, we'll be postponing that just for about an hour until it is. Have no fear. We will still be live on Monday night, Tuesday night, and Friday night for the CBB version of the show. And Monday night, I am going to share my screen and kind of show you what I'm working with the projections and all that stuff. So thanks, guys. See you later tomorrow morning. Let's get it. Green Screen City. Take care. Best of luck, and see you Monday.